the gospel of the Pharisee and the sinner. Now, as Catholics, we're familiar with this parable. And what lesson do we gain from it? Whatever you do, never sit in the front pews. No, that's not really what it's about. But that is what our first instinct is. We're looking at it, we're seeing the Pharisee, we're like, I get it. Front pew, that's the way it goes. Sit in the back. That's not what the parable is about. So we have to ask ourselves, what's going on in this gospel reading? Because this parable isn't a field guide to the church. It's not about how to identify Pharisees and how to identify sinners. It's not about how to identify two groups of people. The parable is about us. It's about us and us. For we are both the Pharisee and we are also the sinner. We don't particularly like both of those roles, but that is what we need to do. Read the gospel twice, and once for each role. Now, the easiest part to play is the part of the sinner. We sit in the back, declare our unworthiness before God, and God still loves us. Now, the problem is that we're very good at number 1 and number 3, sitting in the back and having God love us. But declaring our unworthiness before the Lord is hard. And it's partly hard because of what time and where we are. We don't have time. We don't stop. We don't listen. It's hard because we're not left alone with our thoughts. Everywhere we go, there's a television, a radio, the internet, a smartphone, messages. That quiet time, the time to take stock, the time to see what it is that we're not doing right and to bring that to God. We don't have that time. It's gotten to the point where people even fall asleep with the sound of televisions or with their little smartphones in their hands. The time to examine your conscience is slipping away. But we need to examine our conscience, and we need to bring these things to God, and we bring them to the confessional. And we bring them to the confessional so that it can change us in 2 ways. The first of which is it can change our heart by bringing us closer to God. And the second way is by being in touch with our own failings, we can be less judgmental of others. Now, the harder part to play is the part of the Pharisee. And we don't want to play this part because we know he gets it wrong. But we need to go there too, because we are partly the Pharisee. It's uncomfortable because it demands that we change who we are and what we do. Now, the Pharisee knows the Old Testament. He's gone to the temple to pray, and he dresses for the occasion. So far, things are going fine. He sits in the front, but that's not what he does wrong. The place where he goes wrong is he fundamentally misses the perspective of God. He has flipped things on their head. What he is missing is that God loves all of us, the sinner as well. And if you remember the first reading from Sirach, the prophet tells us God does not have favorites, and the Pharisee is assuming that he is a favorite. He lines up a comparison with other bad people, other things that are going wrong, and he tears down other people to build himself up. And this is not the heart of God. The heart of God is that he loves all of us because he has created all of us. And the psalm and the first reading tell us he even has a particular heart for the poor, for the oppressed, for the hungry. What the sinner gets right is knowing himself and bringing to God his unworthiness and asking for mercy. What the Pharisee gets wrong is failing to examine himself, but instead examining others and tearing other people down. And that is where he fails. What we're asked to learn from this gospel is painfully relevant today because our culture likes to tear people down. On the radio, Everything from talk radio to sports radio to the comedy troupe in the morning. It's about tearing other people down. And spiritually, we need to change the channel. Much of what constitutes popular news is about how people fail and what they've done wrong and tearing them down so that we can feel superior about ourselves, as opposed to examining what do we do right and what do we do wrong. In the internet, there are people who go there for Facebook, Twitter, and comment sections of websites to tear people down or watch others be torn down. And this stew that we're in affects us, and we need to pull ourselves back. Just recently, politically, going through that difficult period at the national level, we went way beyond tearing people down, and it got to the point where people began to call each other as if they were demons themselves. This is not the heart of God. We need to do two things. We need to sit in the back to examine our conscience and to be with the sinner, to declare before God what it is that we have done right, but mostly to be aware of what we need to do to correct ourselves. We also need to sit in the front pew, and there's nothing wrong with sitting in the front pew. But in doing so, what we need to do is know that our worthiness is based on God's love, not based on taking other people apart. For when we take other people apart, when we tear them down, we steal from them to build ourselves up, and that is not God's heart. What the Pharisee needs to do, and what we need to do with the Pharisee, is we need to understand that the value of ourselves and the value of all those around us is that God made them and God loves them. And this is how we will change our heart. May it lead us to take stock of what we need to bring to God. May it give us a more forgiving heart, and may it help us to see with the eyes of God.